So as you can hopefully all see on your screens, the qualification is made up of 5 units. There is the delivery unit, and that is mainly focused around the 6 sessions that you're going to run with a group. That's following the sort of face-to-face training that we're going to do in the woods. So that will come after that. So you'll be trying to identify, over the next 2-3 months, a group. You might already have an idea, but it's trying to identify a group that can be fairly consistent. So you need the same individuals to be there each week. You need a minimum of 3 individuals. I would say a nice number is somewhere around 10. If you're being forced to have a very large number, try and negotiate around that. You will need some help, so you'll need someone else to be there with you, really. It's quite difficult to run this on your own and kind of get all the observations done and all the things that you need to do to get evidence for your portfolio. And in terms of safety and enjoyment as well, I'd always argue that you need, on a normal forest school site, so normal I mean where you've got a road nearby and emergency services can reach you quickly, and it's fairly easy to set up and plan, you need a minimum of 2. If you're on a more remote site, really you need a minimum of 3. That's in the scenario where, if you're on a remote site where it's difficult for an emergency vehicle to get to you. If one of the leaders gets injured and the other leader is doing first aid on them, you need a 3rd adult really to support the group. So try and think about structuring and setting things up for your sessions in a way that is easy. I know we're all going to have pressures on us to deliver things efficiently, and that might mean taking a large group just on your own. But from the point of view of the qualification, you need to blame me and argue the case that you can't have a big group and you need at least one other person with you. So definitely blame me. Say you've been told this is what you need to do. If that helps you argue the case. Anyway, so out of that unit, you'll run your 6 sessions. You will plan them, run them, evaluate them through observations and photos, and then you will do a little write-up. So once you've run your 6 sessions, that sort of takes care of that unit pretty much, because you do most of that as you go along. Next unit, the woodland environment. So for some of you that might feel, oh yeah, I'm quite into nature and the woods and stuff like that, and that's not going to feel like a big leap. For others it might feel like quite a leap, because there's stuff in there around needing to do some reading and understanding the structure of a woodland, but again you'll get all the explanation, all the notes you need. You'll get links to material you could look at. There's loads of great stuff on the web, and there's lots of good books which I'll recommend as well if you're getting more interested and you really want to understand more about trees yourself. I'm definitely a sort of tree and woodland nerd, so I sort of hoover up books about all of that stuff. Find it really interesting, but it's not everyone's thing. You don't have to have a real detailed understanding of the woodland environment to run forest school. But often I think people that get into doing forest school, once you start sort of delving around in the dark recesses of what's in the soil and what the trees are doing and kind of wildlife and stuff, you often start developing an interest and want to know more. So that's sort of involves some reading and pulling together different references that you've looked at to sort of produce some written work around that. So it's it's a little bit of work, but it's not a really long unit, that one. Forest School Program Learning and Development, so that's a slightly longer unit. That's the one that feels a bit repetitive. So like I say, if you've made observations during the delivery of your 6 sessions and you've got a really good observation of a group of children or a child, and there's something going on for them around their progression around learning and development in your forest school sessions, you can use that observation more than once if it sort of meets the needs of the question that's being asked, and that's fine. And you can be quite creative as well how you present some of those answers. There's opportunities for sort of diagrams and pictures and things like that as well if you want to go that way. or it can just be typed. Some of those questions very much based on your observations, backed up maybe by sort of references, research and references. So you might say, or this learning theory by whoever it is, that links in really well with this observation, and you'd sort of reference where you read about that learning theory, book or online or wherever. Again, I'll give you guidance on that, so that's fine. Planning and preparation unit, that's mainly to do with your handbook. So we're going to touch on that in a bit more detail, because the handbook is the key sort of document, the key working document about how you safely deliver your forest school to a high standard. And again, that's sort of got quite a bit of detail in, like, how do you do a fire and cooking each time with a group? Well, this is how we do it. And that can be bullet points. It can be, it doesn't have to be pages and pages, and it sort of backs up your risk assessment, but it gives a bit more detail on how you approach certain activities, how you support children to get the most out of forest school on your sessions. And then the final unit, the practical skills unit, that we mainly cover that on the course. So that is obviously you learning all your practical skills, and then the last 2 days of the training, you're going to get assessed on those. But actually we'll probably spread in reality. Myself and John Withers, who's the forest school lead for Cathedral Primary, who'll be delivering the training with me, who you'll meet next week. We'll be going around observing you, but we'll probably start doing that from sort of, probably the 4th day onwards, maybe something like that. So you'll have had lots of practice, but we can just start getting evidence where you're happy, where you say, oh yeah, okay, I'm happy now to sort of demonstrate, how I would do this or how I do that. Or you might be doing some cooking independently in pairs or in a small group. And then we've got an opportunity to take some photos, maybe ask you a few questions about how you do that with your groups. So the practical skills unit mainly gets taken care of on the course, which is good. So just some quick photos of just what it looks like, the training. So it's a nice site. It's a really unusual site. We're really lucky. It's sort of part of the old Ashton Court estate. Big trees, loads of space. John Withers, like I mentioned, he manages the space up there and runs sessions. He's developed it over the years, and it's a really interesting site. So there'll be an opportunity to sort of look around, get ideas, talk through with him about how things work on his site. Obviously, we're not all lucky enough to have a big woodland space to run our forest schools in. And it doesn't mean you can't run forest school, but it sort of shows what's possible in different spaces. So we'll do different games and activities, lots of things you can use straight away with your groups. And we'll do lots of practical skills based stuff, even if initially you're thinking, well, there's no way I'm going to be using a big knife with my tiny children. That's fine. This is about building your confidence and your experience. So you think, well, okay, I might use a vegetable peeler to peel the bark off some wood with my children. And maybe for the oldest children that I'm working with, if I'm in early years, I might at some point do some one-on-one knife work. But it's about building your skills, building your confidence, as well as, what you're going to do with your groups as well. Sometimes I found over the years, you do an activity and you think, well, I'm not going to use that at the moment. That's just not going to work with my group for whatever reason. And then a few years later, you sort of come back to it. And that's really nice to think, well, I need to sort of practice and refresh those skills, but actually I did do some training on that and I will use those skills again. So don't necessarily write things off if you think, oh, this is a bit advanced. It may be something in the future that you think, actually, yeah, I could use that. I could do more of that. So general guidance, again, you're going to get all this information, so don't worry about trying to remember everything or get everything down. General guidance on working on your portfolio. So your portfolio is basically all the work that you'll submit, all the evidence you'll submit. That'll be done either via email or via Google Docs if you want to do it that way, or shared with me in some way. Usually you'll submit a whole unit at a time, but occasionally there'll be situations where you, with the handbook, for example, you want to send me that as an individual bit of work, because there's quite a lot in there. We'll come back to that and talk about that a bit more. So there'll be guidance for each unit, so you need to follow that. You need to look at there's an introductory bit of guidance that covers all the units, like the general approach of how to do the work. You need to read that first. Again, that'll be clear when I give you the links. There's links that I have and resources that I've identified over the years. There's Pinterest boards. Those are quite good for sort of visual ideas and links to sort of activities, but you don't always get a lot of detail with those. There's something called Scoop It, which is quite good for research and references, more sort of detailed stuff. Occasionally, if you go into that Scoop It link and it's dead, just email me, because occasionally, just the nature of it, if I don't add something on a monthly basis to that, they tend to penalize you and put your Scoop It page on hold. So if I haven't put anything on for a month, sometimes it gets shut down. So do nudge me if you go onto it and go, oh, I can't find anything. Always refer back to your own experience. That's always the best way to complete your written work, and try and link it in with references and things that you've read. That will always give you the best quality answer. Always do things in your own words. You don't need to be really technical. Only your writing can be marked. You can reference stuff. You can put things in exclamation marks and reference them. That's fine. There are a few websites online where people have put portfolios online for one reason or another, maybe to share them with a tutor or whatever, but those tend to become problematic because some of them are quite good, some of them less good. And obviously it's quite tempting just to pull something off that. If you think, oh, that covers that woodland question really well. Obviously, I've got to check. The process of marking is I've got to check that your work is your own. There's someone that then checks my marking to check that I've marked you fairly and that I've also, done that sort of due diligence, if I can say that, checking around authenticity. And then it goes externally to the awarding body AIM, and they check our work based on a comparison with other centres delivering similar training. So there is quite a process around the marking. I'll come back to that again. So plan the order you do your work. So this is about making the qualification work for you. It's not about me giving you a set deadline like you're at university again or something like that, where I say this must be in by the second week in June, and if it's not, then you're off the course. I don't run it like that, because everyone's going to want to follow their sort of written work and their portfolio work in a different way, because you will prioritize things differently. So for example, we're doing our training in the spring. Some of you will want to get on really quickly with running sessions this summer, because you'll be, oh, this is a good time of year, I really want to do it now, I want to do it in the school holidays or whenever. So you're going to prioritize your handbook, because you need to get that done as a sort of an initial submission to me, even if that's not a sort of final version. So you'll want to get that through to me to comment before you start running your sessions, and then you'll want to crack on with the delivery unit. Others of you might say, well, that's fine, I'm not running my sessions with my group until the autumn. So actually I'm going to do, maybe work on the handbook, but I'm also going to maybe do some of the other units like the woodland unit, because that's a standalone unit and you can do that at any point following the training, just sort of linked to reading that you've done. So it's about you having your own plan. So there's a template for a learning plan, which you might find useful. Some people find it useful just to see that, they can tick things off as they complete stuff, and they know what, so where you're at, because otherwise you can kind of lose track of what you've done and what you've still got to do and what order you're trying to do them in. So when you finish a unit, like I say, you submit the whole unit to me. I'll give you feedback, usually within a few weeks. Sometimes it might be a bit longer if it's school holidays or I'm really busy, but I'll give you a time scale usually quite quickly. If I need more at that point, I'll just come back to you and say, can you do an extra paragraph on X, Y, or Z? It won't be, it won't be a matter of rewriting loads. The only time I've had to really ask people to rewrite full questions is if they've been tempted to take a sort of template answer offline and kind of cut and paste that in. And obviously that's always going to be tempting because we're all pushed for time. But in those sort of situations, I obviously do have to ask people to rewrite whole questions. But normally it's just a little bit of extra information that you might need, and then you resubmit that bit that I've asked for again, and then I sign that unit off and you can move on to the next unit. So once you've submitted everything, it's all been marked by me and I'm happy. Like I say, I get it checked internally. There might be then, they might spot something and say, oh, actually you need a little bit more detail. Usually that doesn't happen, and then it goes externally. The awarding body AIM checks it, and then we get the certificate back and I send you that. So we've got a year to complete. So the year, I'll give you the deadline, so don't worry. The year is from the end of the face-to-face training, so not a year from now. So it's a year from when we finished doing the work in the woods. So when's that? Towards the end of May. So that'll be a year from then, but I'll give you that when I email everything to you. So the online web pages look like that. That's kind of what you're going to get. You're going to get links that click into the different bits and pieces that I've been showing you. So that's all. And those are the sort of resource web pages that I have said you could look on. Some of that can be helpful. That's the individual learning plan. So that's just for you to fill out if you want to. I don't ask to see that. That's more for you to keep track of where you're at. If you want to use a different system, that's fine, but I will send you that. So yeah, I've just said, it's a bit of guidance. Again, you'll get that about filling out your individual learning plan. Just try and break it down, try and make it useful. The thing that sometimes causes people difficulties is where you feel like whenever you pick things up, you're struggling to remember where you got to in terms of your written work, what you were reading, and trying to pick up, like working on units sort of midway through them can be tricky. So keeping notes, having detail in your learning plan can kind of help that process. If you think, well, I've got like an hour a week, but I can't spare like half a day, it's going to be an hour a week. On balance, I would say an hour a week generally is not better, but it keeps you on top of things more than maybe saying like, oh, I can have half a day a month. The good thing about an hour a week is you just keep ticking on and it keeps moving forward. The difficulty about half a day a month, and again, it might be that's just how it is for you. You can only find like, half a day a month to move this forward. But the difficulty with that is if you miss a month, you quickly lose track of where you're at and you lose momentum, and then it gets put on the back shelf, and you start to sort of forget about moving forward on your written work. So if you can keep it moving forward, it really helps, even though it might feel really slow to start with. But the thing to focus on, like I said, is the handbook, and we will have a look at that in a second. Yes, so planning preparation unit. So like I said, that is mainly about the handbook. Those are the learning outcomes. So it's about how you develop and run a forest school, how you manage your space a little bit, being able to produce documents to support your running of your forest school, and to be able to plan a program. So the program is your 6 sessions, basically, in line with the forest school ethos and principles. So the first question here, which is quite a short one. So the word limits, again, word limits aren't set in, sort of, they're not a really fixed thing. It's a guidance. Obviously, if you go way over that, I might come back to you and say, would you mind trimming that down a bit? But if you go a bit over it, I'm not going to penalise you on that at all. So that's fine. On balance, I would say it's better to keep your answers short. And if I need extra information, I will come back to you. So in some ways, that's better because it's more efficient for you. You don't have to spend ages, writing loads of stuff you didn't need to write. So the main thing to do is think about how do you cover what's being asked for. So partly it's paying attention to the wording in the question. So the bits where it says 1.1 and then you've got a short question, I didn't come up with that. So if you don't like that, don't blame me, because it's not my wording. Some of them aren't very clear, but what I try and do is reword it underneath to try and pull out the detail, and then I'll try and put some like pointers in of what I'm looking for. So this summarise the key factors that have influenced the development of forest school. Fairly straightforward. I've said in brief. So where you have things like summarise and outline, that's a short question. That could be done. You could do that through a spider diagram. You could do that in a picture. You could do that in lots of different ways. You could handwrite it and photograph it. So there's lots of different ways to do it. You don't have to be completely glued to just typing all your work. It can be done in different, some of those questions can be done in different ways. So a couple of questions here. So where can we find more information? How can we present the work? I touched on that a little bit. How much detail should you go into? And what sorts of references can you use? So these, again, the references could support your answer, but we can't like mark if you have like a whole, long paragraph that's sort of pulled off some website that's really good. That will be, you'll definitely get, a good tick for sort of a nice reference and linking into that reference. But obviously I won't use that if it's a really long bit of work that's been taken from somewhere else. I can't actually mark that, but it does back up your answer, and it gives the detail that's needed on some of the longer questions. So just thinking about how that might look. This is an example. I haven't put it all down. The kind of things that you could cover on that question. And we touched on some of that on the first online session. We touched on some of these, like the historical influences, more recent influences, and then how it's developed. So where did it develop? So through observations in Denmark, obviously Bridgewater College, going and visiting early years settings in Denmark, and then it had sort of a grassroots beginning that's sort of become what it is today, Forest School Association. So I haven't filled all that out. I've just sort of given you a sense of what an answer like that could look like. So again, it's not really long, that one, because of the wording being summarized. It's not a long, detailed answer. It's showing that you've done some reading, that you've got some understanding about where Forest School has come from and what the influences have been. So that gives you a sense of that. Oops. Click on. So this is a more, so this is skipping over now to the delivery unit. This is a more detailed bit of written work. So once you've delivered your 6 sessions, following each session, you'll write maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 paragraphs on your observations from that session, and anything that stood out for you. I'll give you a template that you could use, but you can adapt it or change it as you want to. But there'll be a template there for planning your sessions and evaluating them, which will link into the qualification of some of the units. So the final bit of the delivery unit is this question. So carry out an overall evaluation. Again, summative, they like to use all these words. That wasn't my wording, but carry out an overall evaluation of your introduction Forest School program. So that means your 6 sessions, and explain how that will inform your long-term Forest School strategy. Again, it's very wordy, it's not very clear, but I'll make that clearer in the guidance that I'll give you. Basically, it's sort of saying, how did you feel about those 6 sessions you ran? How did they go? What went well? What went less well? Again, I'll give you all that. And how, what sort of learning have you had as a leader in terms of how you might run Forest School in the future? That's what it's asking for. So I've given you some of that detail. So this is the sort of guidance I give you, evaluating the experiences. So pulling out observations from your session by session short evaluations. Explore some themes around, did it live up to your expectations? Was there anything that surprised you? Give some examples to support that. So it's a longer bit of work, that, because it's an evaluation question. You're evaluating what went on in your 6 sessions. So you've got to draw out some detail, and there'll be a sort of concluding paragraph which will cover this bit about what you've learned and how that will influence your delivery of future sessions. So some of the questions are longer. They're longer answer questions. Again, follow the guidance. If you haven't given me enough for some reason, I will come back to you. So it's fine. You don't need to sort of really worry about, oh, have I given enough examples for it? Occasionally in some questions, it will say, give 2, or give you a number. So it'll say, give 2 examples of, or it might say, it might be a plural, and I then said, oh, give at least 3 just to make sure we cover it. So yeah, don't worry too much. I think try and answer things as best you can, give some detail, base it on your observations and your experiences, and you'll be fine. Right. So this was an example of someone's answer to 3.2, just to give you a sense of what it sort of looked like in terms of length. They talked about the different activities that work well. They talked about how smaller groups work really well with certain activities. They talked about how important it was to have 3 adults with a group to ensure good support and enable use of fire and tools. So again, you might say, well, actually, most of the time, it's probably going to be 1 or 2 of us, or there's going to be someone that I can call on if I need additional support. But when you do tools and fires, that's when you do need to bring in extra people. And they obviously need to be guided by you because you're responsible for those higher risk activities. So that's where your handbook comes in to support people in doing that. But that's, that needs a bit of thinking about. So don't be tempted to try and run lots of complex sessions with loads and loads of tool activities and fire and cooking activities in every session, because that will be quite hard for your initial your initial sort of run of 6 sessions. In a normal group of 6 sessions, like in a mini term, if I'm running for a school, I might only have a fire and do some cooking once or twice. I probably wouldn't do it more than that, because the amount of time it takes for you to prepare to run those sessions, and obviously the amount of time it uses, means that you can't do a lot else unless you're really well supported and you can have the group sort of carouseling around doing different activities. So it's really worth thinking about structuring your sessions a bit and what you like to include, but also keeping things simple and not trying to do too much, and also being willing to go with the group's interest. If they want to spend longer building dens or looking for bugs, then let them, and if you don't use activities, that's fine, that's great. That's kind of what it's about, really. So yeah, they've gone on about what surprised them, that simple and slow-paced activities work really well. Talking about leaf pressing or firelighting to be most popular, but the group loved bug hunting and simple nature spotting games. Yeah, so that's kind of what you're looking at for some of those longer questions, really. And they've done a little conclusion at the end of what they've learned. Is to keep things simple, not to overcomplicate the sessions. Part of the value of forest schools is slower pace and being able to connect to nature. Smaller group work is really good. Repetition of favorite activities and games can be really good as well. So that's kind of how it's going to inform, their future delivery. They're going to focus in on some of those things. So yeah, that was a nice answer, really. So the last sort of 10 minutes or so, we'll have a look at handbooks, because that's kind of the key document that you're going to work on. Some of you might be working in a setting where someone's already started on a handbook or developed a handbook, in which case you'll be working either with them or you'll be reviewing an existing one and updating it, but you'll have to fill out an extra document to show how you've done that, because you've got to demonstrate you've got the full knowledge and understanding of that handbook. You might find the handbook, if you do inherit one, isn't a high quality necessarily, or maybe it's a bit thin on detail. So sometimes, sometimes people find actually it's better just to restart if they've been given one and it looks a bit patchy and maybe not that up to date. If you get given a good one, then it's sitting down with whoever's produced it and kind of chatting to them about, what needs updating particularly, and then it's thinking about reading it through and thinking about what may or may not work for the groups you're going to work with. So the handbook really belongs to you, not the setting. So when you develop a handbook, that's yours because it's linked to your training and it's linked to you professionally. So obviously, if you left where you're working, they would be keen to keep your handbook. You have to say to them professionally, that's fine. But actually that handbook's linked to you and the training you've done. So someone who hasn't done the training shouldn't be using that handbook on its own to deliver for a school, because that wouldn't be safe, because they wouldn't have the experience necessarily that might be needed to guide the more complex or risky activities, particularly cooking, fires and tools. But the handbook should be useful to anyone that's supporting you to show them how you approach things. And some people, what they do is they have a bigger handbook, which may be sort of 10, 15 pages, and then they have a summary, which may be 1 or 2 pages. And those 1 or 2 pages can be really good in giving a sense of how you want someone to support you. So they're not trying to tell them everything they need to do. It's more about the ethos and approach, you know, that you want children to play, you want them to be facilitated and not told what to do. You want them to be supported through asking questions and not dictated to. You don't want things to be run in a very formulaic, sort of structured way. So actually having that sort of document for someone to read, so anyone that comes out with you should look at the, either if they're only coming out once, they might just look at the short version if you go that way. But if they're coming out regularly, they should read your whole handbook. So there's components within the handbook that need to be included. And then there's some bits where you might go, oh, that's not quite relevant for our settings, so maybe we don't need that section. And again, I'll show you all the detail of the things. This is showing an example of someone's handbook. So I'll give you, I think it's 3 examples of different handbooks. One is an early years setting, I think one's a primary, and one's a charity that works with different age groups. And that'll give you a sense of what it can look like. This one, yeah, it was a good one. It was a strong one, fairly long, but it includes appendices with various documents in that around letters they might give to parents on what children need to wear, and might relate to sort of like if you've got behavioural policies for your wider setting, those could go in the appendices. If there's specific bits to Forest School about behaviour, obviously they go in the main part of the handbook, but sort of more general guidance from your setting might go in the appendices, that's fine. So it's broken down into different sections. You'll have a contents page, and that will make it easy for anyone working with you as well as for me marking it to find everything. And you'll get lots of detail around the handbook and, like I say, examples as well. There's some stuff that everyone needs to include, like I said, which relates to the different activities that you could do on Forest School, and how you support them, and the sort of safety aspects, like if you have an emergency during your session. So if you get injured or a child gets injured, how do you deal with an emergency? What's your emergency plan? Obviously that can be very simple and streamlined and easy if you're on a normal site, normal, like, easy access site. If you're in a more remote site, you probably have more detail on that. But again, I'll give you all that, and I'll give you examples of emergency plans, so you know how much detail to go into. So lots of stuff. I've thrown lots of stuff at you, lots of detail. What happens next? So you can start if you want. If you're really keen, if you're super keen and want to get cracking, then do. That's fine. You could start doing a little bit of research or reading. Could be about woodlands. Could be about handbooks. I'll send some links probably before we start the training, but certainly in the next week or so, I'll send some links that you can, if you want to start looking at handbooks and things like that, you can, and some thoughts maybe on the woodland environment side of things. If you want to sort of get cracking on stuff, then nudge me if you're on a tight time scale for some reason. But like I said, regularly kind of chipping away at stuff is generally easier than leaving it sort of to build up and then trying to remember what you did. But when you actually run your sessions, the more notes that you take will make answering the other units much, much easier. So the more photos you take to remind you, the more notes that you take around things that children said. And it might be that the people that are supporting you on those sessions, if you can get people to support you, you could give them that specific job. They could go around with a notepad, and they could note down which children said what. So if they heard a conversation going on about looking for bugs or looking at holes in the ground or whatever it was, or some sort of play or game fantasy thing they were doing, actually someone making some notes about that can be really good later on, because you can see that sort of learning journey for those individuals. Part of that delivery unit is that you follow 3 individuals in more detail. So you're generally making observations about how each session went and evaluating each session. but you've got to follow 3 individuals in more detail to look at the impact. So generally speaking, you're going to choose 3 different characters that are, you know, one that maybe struggles with indoor learning or activities, one that maybe, you know, might struggle with groups or communication. So you're choosing 3 different individuals and trying to look at, you know, and maybe one that's really confident in the classroom or indoors, to see how they feel about being out, because it will be really interesting for you to see that change over those 6 sessions to those different individuals. And then you're going to write up that's in the, I can't remember if it's delivery unit or learning and development unit, but like I say, the more notes you take, the better, because it will support you in writing up those bits later on.